what does manhood mean for me? You know what I mean? And how do I want to continue to live? Because I can't control what I did in the past. I can't talk about what I'm going to do in the future, but I can do something right now in this moment.
Hey, look, I'm about to put you on free game. Listen, stop matching people's energy.
One thing I've become increasingly aware of that people think they're engaged in self-care, but they're actually not.
This video is for anybody who love black men, want to date black men, or simply have a better understanding of black men.
Well, hi everyone. I'm so excited to be with Destin. This is 2 Decades Deep, where we are exploring the depths of our 20-somethings. And I think a big part of our 20-somethings is talking about mental health. We have all gone through the identity crisis, and it's really challenging. So I'm really excited to be with Destin. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, though. Tell us a little bit about you and where you are today.
Cool. So what's going on, y'all? My name is Destin Mizelle. I am originally from College Park, Georgia, where the players play, what they say. I was born and raised in College Park, Atlanta. I went to school at UGA for undergrad, so the University of Georgia. Majored in psychology. Didn't know what to do next, but I did know I loved doing the mental health thing. I love talking to folks, so I ended up pursuing a PhD, and that lands me where I am today. So I'm a fourth-year doctoral candidate at the University of Kentucky, studying to get a PhD in counseling psychology. So that's how I ended up on the 2 Decades Deep podcast, speaking with Taylor about, mental health amongst black folks, black men. But I do a bunch of different things. So I talk about mental health a lot. I think that's one thing I developed expertise in, but also I do a lot of traveling, and that relates directly to mental health as well. So I'm excited to just get into what we're going to talk about today. I think there's a lot that we can discuss. I've just been looking forward to this one.
Yeah, let's get into it. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you talk about you're going into counseling, and the reality is 24% of therapists are men, but only about 4 to 5% are black men. So what got you into psychology?
Yeah, so I remember in high school, I had this really dope professor. I think when I say dope, I mean, he was just willing to challenge people's ways of thinking. And we couldn't stand him. I remember being like, who he get on my last nerve? He's talking too much. All these things are overly complex. But one thing he did make you do was think. So I always was like, and he's a psychologist. I was like, dang, well, maybe his name was Dr. Mills. I was like, maybe I want to be a psychologist. So I went to college. I majored in so many things. I mean, I wanted to be like a medical doctor at one point. I was just changing my major so many times. I was like, well, let's just actually commit to doing this psychology thing. Committed to doing the psychology thing. And I really didn't have much purpose or much reason to do it besides I saw someone who was really influential in my life who did it. But I did start to realize, well, wait a minute. All my friends are coming to me and wanting advice in this, and they wanted me to help them through this. And they kind of see me, what I felt like some ways is like somebody they can depend on when it comes to giving really sound advice. Now, I don't want to mistake therapy for advice giving. That's two different things. But at the time, that's what my mind was leading up to. So I ended up thinking that, this would be a really good opportunity for me to be able to give good advice to folks. And then I got into what it really was. And I was like, okay, I'm really enjoying this. Getting, I think what I've learned now is that psychology is it really helps you get really a deeper understanding of human behaviors and what it means to be a human and the fullness of that. So that's how I got into this point now. But yeah, it's rare because I say this all the time. I rarely get to see the other black male psychologists in this space with me. So I'm always grateful to occupy this space. I know what it means, so I don't take it lightly at all. But also I think there's a great opportunity for healing to have me sitting in front of folks and, discussing a lot of emotional things that happen, a lot of traumatic things, a lot of great things and joyous things that happen as well.
So something that really stood out to me is that you said that once you got into your program, you were able to really realize what mental health was and what therapy was. So for those that are really unfamiliar or not really aware of the complexity of therapy, can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So what I tell people is that therapy is reckoning, right? Reckoning with all the things that have happened to you, whether that be in this current moment, in this lifetime, or whether the things that have happened to your ancestry or generation in the past. Also reckoning with what have you done to people, right? And how are you processing through that as well? So I think it's a lot of reckoning that happens. And I think therapy is often reduced to advice giving. But one thing I'm purely dedicated to is like, I'm not here to give you advice. I think a lot of us have a community where we call our mom or we call our friends. Our friends like, you don't need to be doing that. You need to do this. And his advice is that if advice giving worked, we listen to our friends. You know what I mean? So I think it's more of a more processing space, a more space where we're able to really get into a lot of the pros and cons, a lot of things that you're weighing, a lot of things that are contributing to the decision making and some of the emotions that you're feeling. I think that's where it gets into for me. And I always tell people that, don't come to therapy with me and expect me to be the expert. Like, I am the one that's getting this big PhD, but you are the expert in your life, right? I think a lot of times we know the right things to do. I think that we often lose sight of that expertise though and want someone else to help us. Then I'm just like, no, I'm here to facilitate the expertise, but you're the expert in yourself. And I just want to watch you work and help you get to that space.
I have so many follow-up questions for what you said. Let's talk about this one for a second. So you said that when you're having a therapy session with someone, it could be about something that they're currently dealing with or things that their ancestors or past generations dealt with. What are you referring to? And can you just talk about that cultural tie or that generational tie to your mental health?
Yes, for sure. I'll do this by telling a story. And it's something that's really interesting. So I remember growing up as a kid. And my mama, she always be like, we'd be doing something in the kitchen, she cooking, whatever, she doing in the kitchen. And she always be like, no, don't open that plate don't open the cabinet over the food. And we always be like, all right, I mean, if whatever floats your boat. So it got to a point in life where I stopped opening cabinets over my food. Don't know why, I just stopped doing it. And it just kind of like, okay, that's just what we do. My mama said, don't open cabinets over the food. Don't do it. I remember having company over my house and I'm like, look, no, don't open the cabinets over the food. And one day I thought, why do we not open the cabinets over the food?
Right.
Right. And then I called my mama and I'm like, Mom, you know how you tell us not to open cabinets over the food? Why is that? And she was like, because I grew up with roaches. And I was like, I ain't never had no damn roaches in my life. You know what I mean? So I think when you think about mental health and generational trauma and how things can carry on to generations, think about that. All the things that you might be doing that serve the particular purpose in that generation might not be as helpful as now. But the reality is growing up with roaches and having to fear roaches will jump over your food or roach droppings. That's something that's traumatic. My mom did those things to survive. So what things are we bringing into the space right now that were survival tactics? And we understand why we did them, but they're no longer useful to us in our growth. And I think that is very apparent in, emotions, the things that we do physically, like opening the cabinet, right? The way that we think as well. All those things may have been useful back in the day or whenever for survival, but how we're maybe not so much now. And even just considering, especially with Black people, how race and discrimination plays a big role in that, and in our place within America has played a big role in that. So I think all those things kind of get into that generational piece. And there's so much really deep diving that has to happen within a therapy space to address a lot of those things. And it's very complex, but I think therapy is the place to really get into it.
Destin, what you mentioned is so real because I think a lot of the ways I react to certain situations are because of how my parents react to different situations. Right, I'm like, I don't know why I do this. I don't know why when I'm stressed out, I just walk and start cleaning up. Why am I cleaning up right now? Because that's not helping nobody. But I think that's really true. It's because it's learned behavior essentially. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you mentioning it like that because I think we hear this we're breaking generational trauma, we're breaking generational curses. We hear those things, but it's how do we actually do that? And I love that you're holding space for and acknowledging that. Also, what works in one generation may not be applicable or will work in other generations. And something that's really significant about Generation Z is we grew up in a digital world. We were the only generation that grew up in the height of social media. We're the only ones that have all gone through it. And that has affected us substantially. I even think about when there are natural disasters or where there's tragedies, mass shootings, we can see that in real time by opening up our phones. And I'd love to know what are some of the ways that you're addressing or how do you kind of pivot for Gen Z, not audiences, but how do you pivot for Gen Z clients of yours?
That's a good question because I don't have many Gen Z clients. My clients right now range from probably millennials and what is it, Gen Y? I think I don't know what they're called. What's before? What's after millennials? I don't know. But I do have a couple of Gen Z clients, and I really enjoy working with Gen Z, particularly because Gen Z are unique. Like Gen Z has so much awareness. And I think that is a skill set. Because I think one of the first steps into reckoning is awareness. However, Gen Z likes to intellectualize everything. So now they feel this way because of that and this and that and this and this and this. And I'm just like, wait a minute. You feel. Let's just stay here for a moment. Because I think what happens is when we try to intellectualize emotions a bit too much, we get into dangerous territory of not being able to sit with emotion. So a lot of things with Gen Z, I'm like, wait a minute, this is what you feel. This is what happens. Let's stay here and process this for a minute. Very uncomfortable for Gen Z, a person who's aware and knew all of these things, to be like, yeah, you have this awareness, but there hasn't been a level of acceptance and appreciation for this emotion that you're feeling right now. So with a lot of Gen Z, I have to slow them down because, I mean, there is a overwhelming amount of knowledge that all these, everybody comes in with from Gen Z in terms of like TikTok. I mean, everybody's smart and has a lot to offer on TikTok, or whether it be threads or Reddit or Instagram posts, whatever the case may be. Everybody's knowledgeable in that way. So I often have to have people often pull back from the intellectualization of emotions and what you're feeling and kind of just let them exist in that moment. That's difficult for a lot of people to do because we often like to have an explanation for things. It's kind of like we can explain a lot, but not everything can be explained in this very deep intellectual way. It's emotions.
Yeah, I I definitely could be one to be like, oh yeah, I'm naming everything. And I while that's, I believe, important, I think we have to be careful with that because it's like, yeah, you're just like, yeah, I'm naming it and that's that. It's like, no, but sit in that, process that. I think that's really important that you mentioned. Something else that I want to talk about is, so you're kind of shedding light onto what it would look like to have therapy with you. Can you just talk a little about, I know you can't go into specifics, but some of the demographics, or maybe do you have more Black and Brown clients? And if so, do you cater your different therapy styles based on the demographic?
Yeah, for sure. So I can tell you a little bit about where I am in my therapy journey. So I'm not a licensed psychologist yet, but that's the ultimate end goal. So with me being a practicum student, a part of my coursework is me to work at different therapy sites to get a whole bunch of experience. So my first year doing therapy, I was working at a college counseling center. So I'm at the University of Kentucky. So I worked with mostly, white folks, but I had a couple of different Black clients, which was a really dope experience. My second space I worked at was a community mental health spot. And at that spot, I worked with solely Black clients. And I worked with Black clients who were struggling with the effects of racial trauma. That's particularly really important in Kentucky, considering that Breonna Taylor lived in Louisville, Kentucky. And that's why I was conducting that therapy at. So really special space. That's why I got to work with a couple of Gen Z folks. I also had the opportunity to work with older generations as well. I mean, I want to say my oldest client was 68 something. I don't know. It was old, but or older in age. And then now I'm working at the VA. So I work with veterans that live where I'm at, and I work with a bunch of different identities, white, Black, but they're typically middle-aged men at this point. I have a couple women in that as well. And next year I'll be working at a prison. So I'm curious to see how all these things work, but I definitely think that, yeah, the therapy that I give is definitely tailored depending on, for one, the needs of the client. Clients need different things. They need different clinical presentations. For example, someone who is might be struggling with people pleasing. I might have to be careful with the amount of emotions that I show with them in the session, because they might often feel like they want to make sure I'm okay and protect me in the space. I'm like, wait a minute, this is your space. Let's work with your emotions. I can handle these right here in this moment. But also someone who might need to connect more. They might need to see a human is sitting in front of them. I'm able to show them a lot more and engage with them in a different type of way. So I think it's definitely, for one, catered to what the needs of the clients are, but then also along those same lines. I mean, I can't lie and say that race doesn't play a big issue, a big a big deal in how someone is able to show up within a therapy space. I mean, the language that we're simply able to use amongst Black folks is a little different. You know what I mean? Or the language that you use when you're speaking with someone who has like the same identities as you is just a little bit different. Like there's certain things I wouldn't say around my white clients, not because I'm afraid of saying it, because I don't think they will understand. They don't speak the language. So yeah, it's a balance between all of those things, but definitely, for surely, there's a difference in the therapy room. And I think that is just based off the demographics and kind of what I mentioned earlier in terms of what they need. What are you coming in for?
Yeah, and let's also talk a little bit about, they're called modalities, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the modalities. That's something that I've learned in therapy since I started my journey maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I noticed just out of interacting with my past therapists is they've mentioned like, oh, let's try this type of modality because, you know, you're a Black woman and then you may relate more to like this type of style and this type of like debunking or reframing your mindset with certain things. So I'm interested to know for you, are there certain modalities that Black or brown people use more, or is it really circumstantial?
It's circumstantial. I want to name that first off, 90% of these modalities that we probably hear about were made for white people in general, if we're being completely honest. I do believe there is a lot of room to culturally tailor these modalities, but the lens I take is I am more integrated in terms of modalities. So I'm a collection of things that are intuitive, which often lose value in the therapy space, things that are intuitive. I lean a little bit into interpersonal processing therapy. I lean a little bit into relational cultural therapy. And I kind of create this beautiful concoction of therapeutic modalities that kind of work together. And depending on the client, we talked about the client needs a little bit earlier, I might actually like lean on one versus the other. Like I'll talk about like relational cultural theory or therapy. It looks into like how a person connects and disconnects and where did they learn that at? Kind of like what we was getting at with like generationally and like my mom, she gonna be like, why you tell these people I had roaches?
So not a business.
Right. Why you tell these folks I got roaches? But thinking about that, like those things carry too in the way we disconnect and connect with people. So I hear a lot of people in my therapy sessions get into like, oh no, you do this, I'm cutting you off. And I'm like, well, who taught you that you're supposed to cut somebody off when they do something wrong? We're humans. We all gonna do something wrong to each other one day. So what would it mean to stick with that relationship and not grow out of it, but grow with it, grow through it, right? Grow in a different type of way. That's my whole bag. I'm always like, no, why are you trying to instantly cut somebody off because they did something wrong? You're going to do something wrong one day, and you're going to want that type of grace. And then IPT, interpersonal processing therapy, I use what's going on in the therapy space to actually talk about what I perceive to be going on outside the therapy space. For example, say me and you were in therapy sessions together, and I was like, I don't know, I'm receiving Taylor to be just kind of like standoffish today. I would name that. I'd be like, hey, I want to name that. Today I'm feeling like you might not be showing up and being, you know, your full self, like something blocking this space right here. Then the client probably be like, yes, no. But I also say, well, yes, other people outside of this space also might be experiencing that too. Right. So using the therapy space as almost like a in vivo real life thing that's going on. Say if like a client like does something too that like is offensive. I had this happen before where a client does something that's offensive. I just name it. I'm like, look, I didn't really appreciate that. I'm curious if we can talk a little bit more about that before we move on, because the therapy relationship is a model for what can happen outside of it. I'm a name that I didn't appreciate it. We're going to process it. We're going to move forward. Right. There's also this other thing called corrective emotional experiences. And this is, I think, the most important thing for me as a Black man is that I've worked with a significant amount of, honestly, Black men and Black women that comes in and there's another Black man that has caused some type of trauma or something they need to process through. And there's always a barrier in coming to speak with me because oftentimes there's a level of like them. Some people might not feel safe around Black men, but you get in my space and I'm like, oh no, let's talk about this. Let's process this. I affirm, I validate. It's such a healing experience. And it almost kind of like rewrites what we know. It's a corrective emotional experience. So I really just lean into all of my therapeutic modalities. And even though I talked a little bit about intuition, but I'm always like, nah, we got a sense of knowing that's kind of like innate that we can't put our hands on. In the therapy spaces, I don't think it's often valued depending on the modality that you're in, but I'm always like, nah, like in my spirit, I just feel something. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
I sound a little churchy, but you just feel it in your spirit when something's up. I'm like, let's talk a little bit more about this. Let's lean into that. I'm not afraid to lean into that spiritual intuition piece that like, there's no clinical signs of this, but I'm just feeling led to talk about this for a minute. So I'm more integrated in my approach. I don't lean on one, but it just depends on the setting I'm in, the client I'm working with, and just how that works out.
Yeah, yeah. What you're picking up on discernment. Yeah, that's also another churchy word.
Yeah.
But I'm picking up on discernment essentially. And I think it's really valuable when you're able to integrate and not just lean on certain modalities just because that's maybe more common or that's what people hear. Because I hear about like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot. And I've like heard Write thumbs down. You gotta explain that.
Well, I think CBT, just to explain it very quickly, first of all, CBT is, at least for psychologists, it is the entry level like therapeutic modality that a lot of people learn. So the first thing that we learn as therapists is like CBT. Like CBT is looking into how your emotions and thoughts affect your behaviors. So that's really good and helpful, but oftentimes clients need to go deeper because it's not simply, like we talked about earlier, not simply my emotions and my thoughts, but it's so many things that are in my body, in my ancestral history that we have to go deeper in talking about. So I think when working with things like anxiety and overthinking, CBT can be really helpful in kind of like nipping that in the bud, figuring out what triggers are, figuring out what some of those underlying like automatic thoughts and processes to like really kind of nip things in the bud. But even then, I do believe that like there is a level of like deeper diving that we can go. So I didn't name CBT as one of the modalities I use. I don't lean on it a bunch, but I do see its utility. But I do think training or treatments or training facilities or graduate training should be more intentional about just sharing other modalities and like giving value to those, because I believe that like if I put one of my Black clients through CBT in all of this fullness, I think they'd be like, I ain't come here for that. I want to talk a little bit more in detail. I want to bring a little bit more myself here. I don't know. But it's helpful though. So I would say CBT is useful in a bunch of different ways. CBT, CPT, all these things are useful, but it's not something that I typically lean on. But I know a lot of therapists who lean on it and a lot of clients who appreciate it. But I hope no one comes to me expecting purely CBT, because you're going to be in for a big shock. I got a lot more to offer. CBT can be in there though. But we're gonna rock it out with a bunch of more modalities.
Yeah, it's like I got some stuff in my back pocket for you. But speaking of going deeper, we're going to segue into one of my segments. It's called Let's Go Deeper. And you have the opportunity to debunk, address some of the misconceptions or some of the trending topics surrounding therapy. So we're gonna go deep, okay?
Okay, let's talk. Let's go.
So something that I would love your perspective on is just this concept of Black and brown men being a little more hesitant to go to therapy, because the reality is there are a lot of societal standards of what is deemed masculine or what is deemed like healthy for a man. And a lot of men view therapy as being weak, or I don't want to show my vulnerabilities. So can you address some of the things that I just mentioned?
There's a lot of hesitancy for Black men to come into the therapy space, just because of the way it may be perceived in terms of like weak, or just looking into like masculinity issues or things concerning masculinity. I think that I have experienced that where men will come to my therapy sessions and then they're automatically like almost don't really fully want to lean into it. And there's a bunch of things going on in the space in terms of two men, for one, talking to each other. But also, there's one thing that's going on with men is that like women are our safe space. Like regardless of somebody's like sexual identities, regardless of like whether they Black women, white women, women are men's safe space, particularly Black men. Black women are Black men's safe space. So to get in front of another Black man and talk about all the things that are wrong, it's like, wait a minute, this goes against the script. I do this with some Black women in my life. So I think for one, there is, particularly when it's in my therapy session, there's a new type of uncomfortability, which can be healing as well, that like they have to lean into of like, I am about to cry in front of this man. and I cannot hold it together. And I don't even like crying in front of nobody. And I think that's the difficulty in it. It's like coming and speaking with someone new, someone who doesn't have this trust, and like sharing with them things that you've never shared with anybody in the world. That is devastatingly hard. And thinking about the amount of societal expectations that are placed on men, I feel bad for a lot of men. I also think like, damn, I feel that way too, though. They're sitting in my therapy sessions, because there is, I think, a tremendous amount of stress that are placed on men, and we don't talk enough about it. I mean, I see a lot of like TikTok videos and people like attacking men. And I'm curious about that because I'm a scholar of bell hooks. So let me show you this real quick. Actually, I'm on my second read of this. I'm going to put this book to the death of me. This book changed my life. It's called The Will to Change, Masculinity and Love by Bell Hooks. And what she talks about is, in order for men to be able to heal and to have a more comprehensive viewpoint of feminism, is that we have to understand that men are also suffering under the system of patriarchy. So yes, we might be getting paid more, but there's also really a big give that men are leaning into. It is like not helpful. Think about why men have higher suicidal rates. Men are often very much so depressed in a lot of different ways, and not as emotionally competent or fluent as we should be. I think emotion really is something that like is not necessarily valued within the space of manhood. We often hear like, I want a man to provide, or I want a man to protect. I'm like, yes, have a man provide and protect. But what about having that man also nurture and love, you know what I mean, and be valued? I think all that goes into not only manhood, but his human and personhood as well. So yes, I think there's a lot of barriers into coming into treatment. So whenever I have a client and they come into me, everybody's hard body and like, yeah, I mean, I'm just going through this. And I'm like, don't worry, we're going to get that tear and we're going to sit with it too. Or we're going to get that difficult emotion to process through, and we're going to sit in that moment and it'll come. And I validate, I show love, I nurture, I do all of those things just as a way to like model and show appreciation. I also named it just like, look, I know this is difficult. I know that's hard what you're dealing with. And I see you in this space, and I'm glad that you let me into this. It's a privilege for you to show me these things and tell me these things that you never told anybody else. So yeah, it's a lot that men are going through with Black and brown men in general, considering that balance between like having oppressed identities and also living in a lot of power. I mean, it's just so much that goes into it, but it's a lot that men are going through. I lean on, bell hooks as, my example for just how to deal with men and patriarchy. I also deal with myself and how I show up in this space and the emotions I'm feeling. But yes, men definitely struggle with it. But there's a lot of room for growth, a lot of room for grace and growth, I would say.
First of all, I just appreciate how you do validate men and make them feel safe, because there are not a lot of spaces for that for our Black and brown men. So I just appreciate you even doing that. I just wanted to acknowledge that. There's something that you said that I want to dive into a little bit about this, like, what does masculinity look like? And you talked about providing, and there's a lot of cultural expectations for men. There's a lot of societal expectations for men. There's religious expectations for men. Yep. Like people quote verses and scriptures or things that they heard on the pulpit about what does a man look like. So I'd love to know, how does that really affect one's mental health? Because that's a lot of pressure.
Yep. One of the main problems that a lot of men, and this is not even Black men, I work with men across different spectrums. A lot of problems that men bring into my space is that they don't feel like they're doing a good job or has done a good enough job providing for their families. And that is really tough to sit with somebody with, because when you've been raised to protect and provide, and that's like the two things you do, and you're falling short in one of both categories, then who are you and what is your value? So it takes a lot of reframing or shifting what the understanding of masculinity and manhood is. And I do a lot of like psychoeducation surrounding like things like bell hooks. Now I think you have to be at a certain level to understand bell hooks in terms of like where you are in your masculinity journey. Like you're like somebody who's red pilled. I'm like, read bell hooks, you're literally gonna faint. You're gonna be like, wait, what is this? They're giving me some ABC no. But I think once you reach a level though, like there is time to like deeply dive into like you deciding what does manhood mean for me? You know what I mean? And how do I want to continue to live? Because I can't control what I did in the past. I can't talk about what I'm going to do in the future, but I can do something right now in this moment. And what is that? A lot of times it's really learning to love the fullness of yourself and all the things you have to offer. Maybe you didn't provide all the nicest clothes or nicest houses, but were you there? You went to every game. You know what I mean? You were arguing with the coaches, and you know what I mean? Everybody knows that if I was to call my dad, then my dad is going to be present. He's going to advocate for me. Like, what does that mean? Or what does it mean to, you know, be in a space and feel like you can show up exactly like who you are? And that is still manhood, right? I think there's a lot that goes into just our understanding of men and masculinity. And I think that at the very core of it, it has to start with love of self, love of others, and then figuring out how to balance the cultural expectations that are placed on you, the religious expectations that are placed on you. But at its very core, it has to be love of self. Like, and that's difficult to get down into the deepest levels of it. And you spend 20 sessions for someone to say, you know what? I don't know who I am. In the version of myself that I am, I don't think I love it. And that's difficult to be in that space because it feels very empty. However, once you have reached that space, you can stay there. Yeah, we can spend time there, right? Like, I think there's value in that, but you can't stay there too long. You actually have to, you know, work to figuring out what do you value, you know, what things you like, what you don't like, almost starting from scratch in a lot of ways. So it just depends on the man and their experience. I think sexuality plays a big role in that, considering like, what is something like feminine or masculine, like all that stuff has to be deconstructed because I don't even know what that means anymore. We don't know what's masculine versus feminine. I mean, or sassy.
I was about to bring that up. People stay calling men sassy if they do self-care or if they get a pedicure, if they're emotional or I've been hearing a lot about this sassy word.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think I really got to find where this comedy and jokes fall within my worldview because I love it and I laugh at it, but also those things are harmful. Like, we don't think they're big deals, and then you have a client that comes and say, well, I was doing this, and, you know, my girl called me sassy. And I'm just like, you know, it's almost like pressing on a wound that's not totally healed yet. And it's like, give it time to heal first, and then make the sassy jokes. But I appreciate, man, leaning into all the things that might be considered feminine or sassy. I mean, I think that just it's personhood. And I think that don't make a person less masculine or less manly because they're expanding their idea or defining what manhood looks like for them. I think that it's been so rigid and like we've been leaning on this hegemonic version of masculinity when the reality is like, look, man, people gonna let them be and just accept what it is. You know what I mean? And yeah, that's why I land that on it.
Yeah, because that was going to be something else that I mentioned because I really do think it does people men a disservice when we are making these jokes and we are, you know, like, well, they need to do this and they need to do that. And like, I even hear on TikTok all the time, like, if a guy, we're not gonna go into this, but if a guy like doesn't pay and they're like, okay, like, all right, girl. And those subtle things though do add up. And I could only imagine how that could make a man feel about his manhood.
Yep. Yeah. I think money plays a big deal. Like, money is really important. Money is really important in terms of how we view manhood. And I wouldn't even sit right here and say it's not. It is very important. But if there's a man who feels very connected to himself, his community, then he's a very powerful man, even if he doesn't have money. A lot of clients come in that are men and they're struggling with the idea of success. They like are reading success books, watching success podcasts, or all these things. They're like, I got to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm going to go to the gym and then I'm going to read a book every day. And I'm like, dude, come on now. You get up at 12 every morning. How do you start your day at 12 and then figure out what success look like? You know what I mean? Like, let's make this fit what you need, because success is often seen as like monetary or like things that you do within academia, within your job. But no one ever talks about like the most successful person being, most successful person being someone who has a family that loves them and has like really good interpersonal relationship and is really appreciated across the board. I don't want to speak very generally, but I think that a lot of folks who might be successful as we see it, then you have their kid come out in the public and be like, I ain't heard from my dad in 3 years. They're like, yeah, they got, these big jobs and all this money, but like the people that's closest to them aren't feeling it. You know what I mean? So what it mean to value, like, dang, well, I got a family that loves me and I love them, and a community that loves me and I love them. I am successful, right? Like expanding what we know as success. But money plays a big deal. And even circling back to the women's comment about like paying for food, I'm not going to get into like tradition and things that should be kept and things that shouldn't be kept. But I think women just also need to understand that in this day and age, just as much as you are assessing to see if a man is a good suitor for you, I think at this point, likewise is happening. Whereas like I had a friend say, like, I just need her to offer to pay for the bill. I'm going to pay for it every time. But if she doesn't offer it, that tells me a lot. And I'm like, okay. I'm not, like I said, we don't got to get into the nuance of the conversation, but I do think that like women should also know that they are also being, just as much as we're being evaluated, so are they in certain ways. I hate using the word evaluation. It seems so, but
I know what you mean though, but there is a level of, we're both feeling each other out and we're both seeing if you are going to fit into my life holistically. And I think those little things actually go a long way. Not just turning into a dating podcast.
Right. Led by Destin and Taylor. Ask us all y'all questions. We got you.
Ask us anything. I know it all. But I think it's really important though that we're recognizing like what does success mean? And as people of color, I'm pretty sure you've heard the term, you have to work twice as hard. And I think that's how I literally can show up, is like just doing so much and exerting so much energy and thinking that like, okay, I'm also the one that's like, wake up early, do all these things, is because it's like, I have no choice. Right. And so I have found being in therapy, sometimes I also bring that energy into therapy. Like there is a guard up because I'm like, okay, I have to be the perfect client now. What are ways people can, obviously it takes effort, it's not like a one-stop fits all, but what are some of the things that people can do to kind of like break those barriers down? I know you talked about awareness. I know you talked about like being in tune with yourself, but what are other things that we could talk through or walk through?
In session, I would say one thing, I love that you brought up the perfect client. I have a bunch of clients who want to be the perfect client. And it's like starting with the understanding that there is no perfect client. The perfect client can often mean like doing all the homework that you're assigned, or answering questions in a way that sounds really like intellectual, or like being friendly with the therapist. But I think that's not necessarily the goal here. I think that like the goal is for therapy to get really ugly, to really pull back scars. I mean, in some ways can be like, in the beginning can be a battleground of like, let's really get to it. And that's not easy. Like you said, there's this guard up. So what it means for us to really work past getting this guard down, I think one thing that I really want people to do in therapy is to like, and this sounds so difficult, but show up authentically. You have no reason to want to impress me. I need to see exactly who you are so we can work through it. Like, I think I made a TikTok about this though. You rarely get to see a client be angry. They come to the session and they're laughing. I'm like, wait a minute. You just told me you didn't have insurance on your car and somebody just hit your car. What's funny and why are we smiling? Where's your anger? And they're like, well, I was angry. And then you start asking them questions and they get to yelling in session and screaming. I'm like, yes, that's what we need. I think there's a level of vulnerability into being our true selves. I think there's 2 spaces in life where, maybe 3, but 3 spaces in life where you should be fully able to be yourself. The third one, I was like, is like romantic relationships. When you're with your partner and somebody you decide to be with, or maybe I should even say like life partners. That's a little bit better. Your life partner that you decide to be with and show up with, they should be able to see like the fullness of yourself. When you're home alone, that is a full version of yourself. And then when you're in the therapy room, that is a full version of yourself. if you go into therapy and you're putting on a facade, it's not as helpful as you think it might be, because you are not fully being present and being yourself. So I say awareness is first, then authenticity is next. And that takes a level of boldness that a lot of people might struggle to show just off strength of it's uncomfortable to be the self that I am right now. Like when I turn this camera off, now to go be that person that I am going to be in front of my therapist is like, whoa, that's so uncomfortable. I always say it now. I'm like, I wonder what my dogs would say if they could talk and like tell people about who I am. You know what I mean? Because they get to see everything, right? Like they get to see me probably running around here being crazy or like screaming, hollering, watching TV, laughing, like all being angry. All the things that goes into making up a person. But yeah, I'm a big believer in like authenticity is the next step. And a lot of people struggle with being authentic because being Black people, we walk out our house or we go to our office and sometimes there's a mask that we have to put on. There's a wall that we have to put up when we engage to protect ourselves. And once again, as we talked about, that mask makes a lot of sense as it relates to survival, or it did make a lot of sense in the past as it relates to thinking about things like that are generational. I might be rambling now, but yeah, it's just very, therapy just gets really deep. It gets really deep.
It gets really deep. It goes super deep. Yeah, and I do want to shift gears a little bit because we have been talking about a lot of trauma in therapy and just unpacking and laboring with a client, but there also is a misconception that therapy is only if you're going through a traumatic life event. Can you tell me like what actually is therapy in the sense of what can you cover? What can you get out of therapy just outside of going through like a breakup or something very traumatic that happened in your life?
I wish I had a microphone like you have so I can hold myself up to the mic and I'd be like, is this thing on? Listen, therapy is not only for when you're going through something. And I tell people this all the time. The sad thing about therapy and being a therapist is like, I only get to see people when they've hit rock bottom. Want to know why that is? Because no one comes when they're feeling good. And you might, start therapy when you've hit rock bottom and then you start to feel better and you continue coming. But no one comes in therapy and say, wait a minute, nothing's quite wrong. I just want to talk. And I hate that. One reason being is that I think that we often like to play offense on our mental health. We like to wait until something wrong. Like, oh, wait, now I can finally fight that. Like, no, be on defense. So let's get together right now when things are going well and you're in the space of joy and peace and laughter. So that way, when we're in the therapy space, we can work on the offensive. We're figuring out things like, you got a really good regimen right now, but let's work on this. Let's process through that before things get a little bit too difficult for you to manage. So I'm a big believer in like, no, you need to actually be on the defense in terms of your the offense in terms of your mental health, not necessarily running from it or thinking everything's okay and I don't have to come, but really being intentional about things that are okay. And I want them to stay okay. So let me make sure I do what I'm supposed to do. I have therapy sessions where we actually don't do a lot of processing. I had a therapy session where somebody just came and yelled the whole entire time. And I sat and I listened and I affirmed and I showed value in that rage because like we said, when you walk out of this space, mask. As a Black man, you're not allowed to show that. So come yell at me. I can handle that. And I'll share that anger with you. I had some therapy sessions where people want to come and like laugh and just talk about all the good things and positive things that are happening in their life. And I'm like, wait a minute. So what did he say now? Show me the messages. And we getting into like the real happenings of their life and like working through that too. And like, not from perspective of like, oh, this is something that's really negative. It's like, no, I'm interested in this person and I'm trying to figure out how to go about this. And am I reading too deep into the science? And like, therapy is a place where we're going to cry together. We're going to laugh together. Sometimes we don't have to sit on the floor and just chop it up and talk. Sometimes we can go for a walk outside. You know what I mean? I think it's a very much so a space that it should feel safe to be whatever it needs to be. It should be a room of safety. You know how in a lot of spaces or a lot of like post-apocalyptic movies, a lot of people have like a safe room and they're completely disconnected from the world. That's what I aim to have with my clients. I want them to be able to come to my session and everything on the world is going on, but in that room, they can talk about however they want, whatever they want to talk about. And in a lot of cases, whatever they want to talk about. They can cry, they can laugh, they can scream, they can holler, they can dance, they can sing, they can play music. They do all those things as long as they're coming in and getting what they need. And that looks different depending on where someone is and who they are. But yes, I definitely believe that like therapy is expansive. Now, this is only my philosophy or therapeutic theory in terms of how I engage. I know a lot of other people who would like this, but I don't want to give false expectation to everyone is. Like some people might be like, no, I'm going to sit here and hear you talk. And that's not appropriate for the therapy space. But I'm Black, so I'm going to add a little sauce on everything I do. And that's just what it's going to be. So yeah, that's just how I operate though. And I've been in training that validate that. And there's a lot of appreciation from my clients. I have really high retention with my clients because of it. So yeah, that's what, that's what I lean on, just the expansiveness of therapy and all it has to offer.
I got one more question for you, and then we're gonna wrap this up soon. But there is this level of dependency that people can develop with a therapist, and I've talked through this with my friends. Is I sometimes get nervous because I'm like, I feel like I can't make one decision without my therapist, or I find myself if something were to happen, I'm like, oh wait, I'm gonna talk about that in therapy. But there are things that are happening between these sessions. And the reality is you talked about therapy is expensive. There will be some seasons in life, it just may not fit with your schedule. So how can therapy be used as being helpful and beneficial, but also to teach that people can apply this to their real lives as well?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I got a question for you, Taylor.
Uh-oh.
Is there something wrong with dependency? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay. I heard, I was like, okay. Is there something wrong with dependency?
I don't know. I will say, I want to make sure, I'm speaking for myself, that I am able to, you're making me think now, because actually you do need other people and you do need sounding boards in your life. I think the hesitancy for me sometimes is I don't want to feel like I can only do things or think through things well if I'm in therapy, or I constantly let me message my therapist or text my therapist, but maybe that's essentially what it's all about. That may be something that I'm subconsciously thinking through, but that may be also helpful.
Yep. I think that, so you're right. There's a spectrum, I think, amongst many things. With dependency, I think there's a level, the middle ground is always probably the best place to be, but there is I'm overly dependent and I can't do anything without my therapist or without someone being able to help me. And the other is like hyper independence. I don't need no help. I don't need nobody. I made it here by myself. I think that middle ground is I can make a decision by myself. However, I really value the input from the people within my community. Dependency often gets a bad rep, especially in mental health spaces, because it's seen as something that's you can't be alone or you can't do things without support. But I value collectivism and I value community. And I know that without my community, I wouldn't be on this podcast with Taylor because I'd be probably somewhere in jail for making a bad decision. You know what I mean? So I think that it's really important to lean into community. And I tell people that all the time. I'm like, no, I'm glad that you come talk to me about this. I think that touching on therapy though, and how to balance this idea of I'm becoming maybe really dependent on my therapist, is that I encourage people to take a break from therapy. I don't believe that you should be in therapy for how many weeks? It's 52 weeks in a year. You should be in therapy for all 52 weeks in a year. You actually need a break. Your therapist need a break. You need a break to actually practice what y'all been talking about. And on that break, it's important to kind of what we talked about earlier with IPT, interpersonal processing therapy. And what I lean into is now we've developed this relationship. You know what a good relationship look like. You know that you can process with me. You can tell me anything without judgment. Now go create that with somebody else. Right? And what would it look like now to start to build a really solid and emotionally supportive relationship outside of therapy? That's the ultimate goal, is to now let's do everything we do in therapy, but now let's find your community and ways to have them do that. And maybe one person can't be all the things your therapist are, but we can break them up and decide, do almost like a little Tetris with our community. But I do believe that it's okay to have a level of dependence may be a little bit polarizing and triggering, but to want to lean on your therapist for support because that's what they're there for. It's kind of like when you're in your 20s, 2 decades deep, and we still got to call our parents like, I'm calling again, Mom. I need $200. And if a mama got it, she's like, well, that's my role as a mama. So as a therapist, I'm like, that's my role as a therapist, to have you kind of depend on me when you need that support. So it's a delicate balance of it. But I also think like I appreciate clients who show that they lean into depending on me, because it's difficult when you have people who like, I'm not depending on nobody. In fact, I'm paying you. So I come when I love when that transition happens. And it's like, actually, I appreciate my therapist. I want to text them this. I want to call them and talk to them about this. I can't wait to talk to them about this in session. I think that's a beautiful transition to see happen. It often can just be seen in a negative light, but there's a balance and there's a spectrum to all things. So,
yeah, but I appreciate you changing my perspective on that and I appreciate you saying like we need breaks, because sometimes like, okay, now like it's I've been 3 years straight. Like I need a second. And I have taken those breaks, and it's actually been very, very fulfilling. So I appreciate you leaning into this segment. So something that's really big in your life is you like to travel, and you've talked about how that has been very beneficial to your mental health. So what ways fuel you when you're going through something, or how do you keep yourself afloat? You're in a PhD program. That's very intense. So walk me through what that looks like for you to take care of yourself.
Yes. So being in a PhD, first off, nobody really believes me when I say I'm in a PhD program. They're like, you're always traveling. And I'm like, what do y'all mean?
Always.
I spend Monday through Friday busting my ass doing schoolwork. But they're like, nope, you travel just too much, or you dress too nicely and da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Fine. But I would say that traveling has literally so my best friend introduced me to traveling. He traveled, did study abroad, and then me and him did a couple of trips together. And I think that changed my life, because my first year in my PhD program, it was during the pandemic. So I moved to a different state. I moved to Kentucky. It was during the pandemic. And also too, there was a lot of the protests that were going on because of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And then I was reading a lot of emotional books, and I was reading a lot of stuff like The Will to Change. And my whole world is being rocked at this point. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know anything at this point. And I feel like everything I've learned and kind of has accepted to be true are being purged. And I remember I started traveling so much. I mean, school was online at that point. So I'm like, shit, I'm about to take classes in, cause I wasn't doing nothing. I mean, I stayed in the house. All my money was being saved, and all the flights were super cheap. I'm about to go to class in Jamaica. Actually, I'll tune in online, and I'm going to leave and go to the beach. Right. But I think that what I've learned is that as I travel, I really learn more about myself, because I feel more connected to not only the people that's in the United States, but I learn more about myself as it relates to the people of the world. And oftentimes we have a very limited view of who we are and how we connect and disconnect, because we only see it through America's lens. And as we know from America's lens, being a Black person is really difficult. Being a Black man, being a Black woman, those things are really difficult to see yourself through that lens. But as I travel, there's so much just joy that people have, right? Regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their government, regardless of whatever, the world is a pretty joyous place. And I think that's a healthy reminder to me as I turn on the news and see a lot of things that are negative, and see a lot of, or maybe get on TikTok and Instagram, all the things that may be happening. Traveling is a reminder to me that joy prevails in all cases. That's why Black people can go to a protest and be cha-cha sliding and electric sliding, all type of things we'll be doing. Everybody be like, I know they ain't dancing in a protest, but that's just joy. And joy is always going to prevail in that way. So when I traveled, I really did find a really deeper sense of self in the way I connected with God and people of his world. But also along those same lines, I really found a sense of joy. And that's something that once you find that, I believe that it really is beneficial to your mental health. And granted, I'm not perfect, and there is times where I'd be like, I'm about to drop out tomorrow, or there's times where I'm like, I'm done, and I have to lean on to, of course, my friends and my support system are doing things that I know that bring me back to a space of wellness. But traveling has been like that one for me. Literally last week, I did like a spring break trip to Portugal and Spain, and now I'm ready to like conquer the semester again. Because at first I was like, I literally have one more class in this program, and they want me to do this, and I don't want to do it, so I'm not going to do it. It's like, man, just do this. I'm in. But yes, traveling has been my thing. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, you be having a time. And actually, that's I actually found you on TikTok through that. It's through your travel. And then I saw that you also make TikToks about mental health. How did that idea come about? Because I love this unorthodox PhD candidate. I love the travel content, but then I also love how you can break down something that's very complex in mental health within a 2-minute soundbite. So how did that idea come about?
Yes. So first off, I say my best friend, he was the original TikTok star. Like, he posts all his stuff, and I would just be so mean. I feel so bad. I mean, just clowning him because TikTok felt so cringy. I don't know. It's just like, voiceovers on a video. Who do you think you are? Right? But then I used to, like, if you scroll down my TikTok, I was like doing the dances, like the renegade, like, doing all that stuff.
I remember that.
And then I started therapy. And I remember having clients who would like cancel at times. Like, it just happens. It's a part of like, the clients can't make it sometimes. So I'm like, I'm going to go make this funny video on TikTok about what it's like being a therapist. And I do like a POV. End up doing a POV, and they start like doing numbers, and people are like, oh, we love black male therapists. And I was like, really? Let me just post another one then. And post another one. And then I was using a lot of sounds. And I don't mind using sounds. I haven't used them in a minute, but I think I might start back. Whatever, long story. But I began to think, well, wait a minute. I started praying a little bit, and I was like, God was like, all right, enough of sounds. I want you to use your voice. And I started talking on TikTok, and I cringed. I was like, I hate it. But people would comment and be like, wow, I never heard anyone say this or say that. This feels really important. Can you talk about this and ask questions? And it helped me twofold. One, I have always had difficulty with public speaking, and I always hated it. But people always tell me, like, you're excellent. Like, I don't understand what's your hesitancy in doing it. And I'm like, I'm going to get up there and stumble, which is wild because I'm literally doing a TED Talk in 2 weeks. It's crazy how, like, life plays out. But along those same lines, though, I was able to share a lot of information and things that I was learning in my PhD program or just based off my readings with my target audience. I really do love Black people. My life is dedicated to Black well-being. Regardless of what that looks like, I really want to just almost pay it forward. I know I stand on the shoulders of giants, so I want to make sure that everything that I do, I just pour back into the community that birthed me and raised me and made me who I am. So I was able to just like almost get like 2 benefits from it. And then I'm like, well, let me just post this little travel video too. They like, he travels too. And I'm like, I do a little traveling here and there. So I think I've developed this whole almost like traveling psychologist, like, I want to say persona because it's actually kind of who I am, but this travel psychologist brand that I'm like officially starting to lean into because I do love the work that I do in terms of mental health. And I also love to travel. Those are 2 things that have probably been in my life for the rest of my life. And they make a lot of sense together. So now we're here. And once again, I get to talk on a 2 Decades Deep podcast with Taylor. And I'm going to have the opportunity to even reach even more or larger target audience. So, it's been a blessing for me for sure.
Destin, you are so inspiring for so many reasons. You are representation in such a small population of people that are therapists. Like, you're a unicorn essentially, and you've been able to take and use as an act of obedience. You said that God told you to use your voice, and you obeyed, and now your platform is reaching new heights. So that is so inspiring. And just to wrap up this conversation, how do you stay afloat? I mean, you're a human. you deal with the ebbs and flows of life too. So I'd love to know, as someone who you are a Black therapist, how do you deal with the weight of the world? I know you talked about traveling and all that, but what are some tangible things that you do to deal with it?
Yeah, I would say I really lean into my faith a lot. I really do believe that everything is working for my good, and there's a level of like control that I don't place on me. I just place it on God. And I'm like, listen, God is going to work this out. Now, granted, having that mindset is not easy, but I do know there's a lot of things I can control. Like even today when I was trying to log onto the video and I was like, oh, I literally was just sitting on this wrong leak. Like there's certain things that are just going to go wrong in life and things I can control, even like maybe sometimes with the video today, like I can't control that. So like it's out of my control. So relinquishing things I cannot control and really just focusing on really the things that I can. Also, I'm really big on community. Like I don't believe that I have to go through a lot of things by myself because I have friends who are willing to carry my weight just as much as I'm willing to carry their weight. And I have my mom and my brothers and all these things that are able to assist me through this. And this kind of leans on, my next point leans on to control just a little bit, or like not being in control. But I acknowledge all the things that are going on around me that are trying to break me down. And I allow those things to hold their own responsibility instead of placing it on myself. So with school and me being really tired with school and me being exhausted with school, I don't blame myself for being tired and exhausted with school. I've been in school for about 10 years and nothing has gotten easier. So why do we make people go through school and do all these like really stringent requirements to receive a qualification? But it's like, this could have been streamlined a lot more. I divvy out the responsibility where it should be. Because a lot of people will say, well, you're just so tired, you're burnt out, you need to practice self-care. And it's like, wait a minute. Even with self-care in place, these systems are really hard to navigate. So I make sure I know that about myself. But again, though, like there are times where I do fall short of what I say I'm made of. I do get in spaces where I don't believe I'm my fullest self and I'm well. And when I do that, I'm always like, okay, let me take a second right here. Let me check my bank account and let me book a flight. Because that's the point where I need to completely disconnect, right? So, and that flight can be back home to Atlanta. And I just need my mom to make me some oxtails or some beef rib tips and some cornbread and some macaroni and cheese. I'm clearly hungry, right? Or I need to go abroad and just need to go be around, do a solo trip and go sit by the beach in Aruba and read Heavy, which is the book that I did, but I read. But I think that there's so many ways just to connect and get grounded within self. And I believe that, God plays a big role in that. Community plays a big role in that. And for me, traveling plays a big role in that as well. So it's a big concoction that I kind of lean into and see whether, see what's helpful, what's not helpful. But even speaking with, you, Taylor, in this space, like I think sharing a bit of my experience, all that is healing as well. So being able to connect with people and being able to serve and be of service also is something that can be healing and almost make me feel grounded when I fall short, to carry that weight with me as well. So definitely, I think it's a plethora of things that I lean into. But even then, sometimes I do fall short.
Yeah. And I think that honestly, like I was going to say, the feeling is very mutual. Just hearing your experience and just hearing how you cope with things, how you deal with things, and just shedding light on some of the realities of mental health. And, I think that in past generations, and there's still the stigma that like mental health is like either you struggle with it or you don't. And I actually think that mental health is a continuum. Like depending on what is going on in your life, there will be times where you have to really sit with that. There'll be times you really have to deal with your emotions. And then there's times where, life is good and you're just like vibing and living. And so I appreciate you acknowledging both and even acknowledging things that had nothing to do with you, but now you have to carry that. So I think that's awesome. My last and final question is, if you could speak to every Black and brown guy, what is one thing you would want them to know from a mental health perspective about them? Whether it's advice, whether it's validating them, like what is something you would want every Black and brown man to know?
That's a really good one. I had someone, her name was Michelle, tell me that there's a lot of spaces that are going to make you feel average and are going to like diminish your self-worth. But she iterated that self-worth isn't contingent on like the success of what you can do or you can't do. Self-worth is, it's innate, and it doesn't need to be validated by like all these systems, like how much can you provide and the money that you have. Like, you are inherently worthy. So I think if I was to speak to black men, brown men, these people even in general can hear this advice, but particularly to men, like, you are worthy because you are, right? You exist in this world, so you're worthy and deserving of love, care, and respect. And I think oftentimes when you don't see yourself as worthy, you do a lot of things that you try to find worth in. Like, I see a lot of male clients, you want to have sex with 20 women and think that's impressive. And it's like, okay, if that's what you want to do, then fine. Or you work all day, you get really accomplished in your job, but it's like you still don't feel that worth and appreciation that you're looking for, because that thing is internal, and it's a lot of work that you have to do to get to that place. A lot of connecting with people. I mean, reading, whether you believe in God or not, there's a lot of connecting with the world and the earth and God and all these things that you might have to do to be able to understand your self-worth. But for me, I would really say, like, really understand that you have to see yourself as worthy. That is worth, belonging, appreciation is some of the things that are at the core of our existence. And without those things, there is a imbalance, and you're building, or searching for something to balance that, but you're replacing it with wrong things. And when that happens, you harm a lot of people around you. You harm yourself. So yeah, find your worth and learn that self-worth is really internal, and it's not based off your achievements or your sexual conquest. Like that, those things don't make you worthy. You already are worthy.
Oh, I love that. That actually made me a little emotional, because I'm thinking about my brother or my dad or just my family members. There's just so much weight and so much, like, there's so much that they carry on the day to day, and just to be reminded of that is really inspiring.
Yeah.
Well, Destin, I thank you so much for being on 2 Decades Deep, and I appreciate just you being so candid and so open.
For sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. I've been really looking forward to this. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to connect. And I think this is going to be a dope one. It's going to be a real good one.
It's going to be a dope one. And, we may have to come up with a dating podcast soon, because it seems like we haven't.
We have to go live and have contestants come up, and we're going to get them, both of us. I feel like we can make it happen. I don't know.
Right. No, literally. Well, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.